Recording started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome this week's to the Matrexit discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. And I'm going to continue on. We're doing a short series here on decoding churchianity, essentially because a lot of things that are taught in the churches aren't necessarily scriptural. And I'm going to cover a couple quick little topics this evening here. And I've been asked by somebody several weeks ago if I would cover the calendar. And that's kind of pretty much all they said, which covering the calendar in itself, like the feasts and things like that, they get kind of in depth. And I think a lot of those things are dependent on your own personal beliefs as far as what you're following and what should be followed or doesn't need to anymore. Maybe even comes down to depending on what God you're following as well. But so I'm going to cover that, and also going to get into oaths and the oath of office. And these two kind of morph together, whether people realize it or not. One of the things that I found interesting is that when you get into studying law, if you have a good scriptural background and you start getting into studying man's law, code, statutes, regulations, that kind of stuff, you can't really do that without stumbling back onto scripture and onto whether it's biblical beliefs or even look at like laws of Hammurabi. Some of these things start jumping out and cause those to even start making a little bit more sense as well. And so, yeah, they're very closely intertwined. And so I always start out normally stating, welcome here, on this Sunday, the first day of the week, not the seventh and not the Sabbath. And so I'm going to get into identifying that a little closer here. One of the things that we need to realize is that just about everything has been morphed or twisted or changed to one degree or another, such as calling Sunday the Sabbath. And when you really break down the word Sunday and realize what the mystery schools and things were actually following, or what the god even going back into Egyptian times was, there was a worship of the sun. And so it seems quite appropriate that they would kind of morph Sabbath into being Sunday. And what we're really taught is, in the Ten Commandments says, to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, and we're taught this is the seventh day of the week. We even see, for instance, like the Seventh-day Adventists out there. They're trying to follow this a little closer as well. But not only was this idea kind of morphed and changed up a little bit, but also was the calendar in general, or the week in general, what was even, I would say the waters were a little muddied, you could put it that way. Because if we go in and look at the first chapter of Genesis, which covers the first 6 days of the week, that's all that first chapter covers, is the first 6 days. You don't get into the seventh day until the beginning of the second chapter. I find it kind of interesting that it was broken up that way, but I'm not going to get into those reasons right now. One of the things that's interesting then when we're looking at this and you're trying to find, okay, if you're going to look at, for instance, the seventh day and when is the seventh day, then you need to know when the first day was. Well, of course, according to Genesis, the first day would have been when the Creator ordained night and day, separated the night and day. Although the great lights in the sky, the sun and the moon, those didn't exist until the fourth day. All right. So the fourth day, you've got this moon to light the night, and that's the only object that we know of that makes any changes regarding the difference between the moon and the sun. And with the moon on the calendar and in the sky, you'll see what is termed as the new moon. And I would surmise very likely then your new moon, that would be your beginning time, your beginning of the week. And the Sabbath didn't come around until 3 days later. I find this interesting that this is also episode 433 and part 7 regarding decoding churchianity. All those numbers kind of play into each other here a little bit. Like I said, the new moon is on the 4th day, and 3 days later, you've got the 7th day, which would be technically, looking at our current calendar, would be on a Saturday. But that's not always the same. If you pay attention to the calendar, your new moon isn't going to come on the same day of the week, every month after month. It's going to change up. You might have a new moon on a Wednesday. You might have a new moon on a Thursday, which means that this 7th day or this Sabbath that you're supposed to be keeping holy isn't going to always be the exact same calendar day every single week or every single month. It's going to change up, and it's going to change according to the moon and the sun and the stars in the sky. Those are supposed to be your calendar. That is your scriptural calendar. That's what's supposed to be followed. They were given to you for signs and seasons, is what the book says. So I find that really interesting. And when we look, for instance, even at this word Sabbath, it means to stop or to cease. So if you look at it in its context, it would really mean to rest, is what people are told. You're told to rest on that day. And that is a stopping or a ceasing. But Sabbath is interesting because it comes from a shared word that the word seventh also uses. And this word is Shiva, kind of like the goddess Shiva, which also shares characteristics in Hebrew with Shaba, Shaba, Shaba. And in the Shaba, looking at what the word Shaba means, it refers to a promise, or more technically, it means to swear an oath. And that's part of what you're supposed to be doing in keeping the Sabbath holy. It's part of honoring an oath, honoring a promise. But at the same time, I think it's good to look close at that word when it comes to referring to swearing an oath. Part of what we're doing when you stop or you come to a rest or you're doing a remembrance. Part of a remembrance, a lot of the Jewish people wear the tzitzit. I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's blue and white threads that were to hang from the corners of the garment. And I've got one that I made. I put on a clip. I've got several of them, actually. Sometimes I'll just attach them to a belt loop or something. And it's not really there as a sign of remembrance of the commandments, for instance, but it is more of something that becomes like a talking point, or it's a conversation starter. You can put it that way. A lot of times with different things in life, you can't just run up to people and say, hey, do you know about the birth certificate and stuff? You know what I mean? You're thinking you're Looney Tunes. So you're better off having other people ask you questions about things, and then with your answer regarding that, you can drift into other topics and explain other topics. I do the same thing very often with a hat that I wear, or a shirt that I may wear, or a bracelet that I wear 24/7, because those things also trigger conversations, which is a much easier way of talking to people. But aside from that, looking at this word Sabbath, all right, and realizing that it is coming from this word seventh, that it's tying in that word just because of the different characteristics that it shares with that word Shiva, as I had mentioned. That letter 7 actually happens to be the 7th letter of what would you call maybe the Hebrew alphabet. I believe it's pronounced Aleph Bres. So look how close that is really to our word alphabet. I find that very curious. But that happens also just be, that 7th letter in the Hebrew. And I don't think that was done on accident. It's done very much on purpose. When we look into these oaths, this is regarding a remembrance or something that, people are bound to do, or you're supposed to be bound to be doing, like an oath regarding this Sabbath day. And in looking at these oaths, one of the things that I've been wanting to bring up for a while now is that seems to be kind of a hot topic within even, say, the truth community or patriot community, which refers to making sure that the public servants are standing by their oaths. They're keeping their oaths, which I think there's a couple issues with right there. I think people would be much better served if they comprehended what that word public really means, because it doesn't mean you and me. You'll see, protecting the public, through, say, to protect and serve, which you may see on law enforcement vehicles. Well, guess what? Who do they protect and serve? Are they really protecting and serving you? Or are they protecting and serving those who sign their paycheck? I would say it's the latter. When it comes to wanting to make sure that they are following their oaths that they're keeping, especially, for instance, if you're looking at the judiciary, and many of these judges are all appointed, higher up judges, even appointed by the president. And to me, it's kind of like when people, for instance, if you were to go into court and you're going by special appearance, you're entering by special appearance. Well, special appearance is for one purpose, one purpose. It is to question jurisdiction. And I see many situations where people say they're coming in by special appearance, but I never even see them question or begin to question jurisdiction, which tells me if they don't know what special appearance is. And it also tells the judge that same thing. But many of these judges, like I said, even especially ones appointed, when you say, you want to question their oath, or have you taken an oath, or I want to bring forward your oath, things like that, they've not just taken one oath. It's like when people question jurisdiction. Which jurisdiction? There's multiple types of jurisdiction. Point out one. You just can't use a blanket word like that. And bringing up the oath is kind of a blanket situation as well, is they have very well taken more than one oath. There's a private oath that is taken, which is to the Constitution, but then there's more of their public oath that they take, and that's their judicial oath. And who's their oaths taken to anyway? Their oaths are taken to the courts or the state, Constitution, Bar Association, whatever. But what you're not going to find is a place where their oath is taken to you. So what does that mean? That means you do not have the power of enforcement. And at the same time, even by bringing up the oath, what are you inferring to them? You're inferring to them that you have some sort of a position in their judicial society. Well, if you're doing that and inferring that you have some sort of a position, some sort of authority within their judicial society, then you hopefully, surely, are not coming in under special appearance. Is what you've just done there, is you've tied yourself into it. This questioning of the oath is kind of a trick. In fact, I remember listening to a Jesuit even talk about this, talk about how this was introduced into, the patriot community as a trick, as a way to kind of discredit people. because doing that is doing two things. One, like I said, you are claiming a position within their judicial society. And number two, what's the most important thing you're doing? Most important thing you're doing is you are sidestepping the elements of the case. You're sidestepping the whole issue as to why you are there in the first place. So you're kind of leading them down, an alternate path. You're not even addressing the situation. I've seen a lot of court cases. People have sent me like their audios or whatever, and I listen to their arguments. And the majority of the time, I never hear people even argue the elements of their case. They bring up the oath, the flag, they bring up all these different things that make absolutely zero difference to the case whatsoever. And then people wonder why their sanity is called into question. I can see that very well. So people need to realize that this whole oath issue is really nothing but a trick to get you off your game and to kind of show that you don't know what you're talking about. But at the same time, with this whole oath issue, let's always go back and remember where this word oath comes from. It comes up from that word seventh, that word Sabbath. It's interesting how all these things get intertwined with each other. So keep that in mind, everyone. If somebody had a statement or anything they wanted to bring up, feel free to do so. Open the floor for you. But otherwise, until next week, like I always say, you can't remember who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. Because there's going to be many things trying to lead you in the wrong direction. And this is two issues right here that'll do that. Good night, everybody.